Caleb Martin. Let me throw that one at you. 1% better with this particular team.
A lot of these role players, I'm going to try not to be too repetitive, but for almost every one of these role players, get better at making an open catch and shoot three. That's what each and every one of them needs to improve upon. Caleb Martin has been a streaky shooter throughout his career. Obviously, he had that incredible playoff run with the Heat, and he hasn't been a bad shooter, but he's not as consistently good as you would want. And I've brought up before that on open catch and shoot shots, he's had a pretty good percentage. I believe it was above 40% over the last couple of years. Those are admittedly low volume. The optimist would say on a higher volume, because he's getting so much, or because Embiid is receiving so much attention, he's getting more opportunities. Maybe, you can increase that volume. And if that percentage is true, he'll be a much more effective overall 3-point shooter when he's not relying on, creating as much for himself. The pessimist would look at, well, you can't really look at those numbers because it's so low volume. But for every one of those, and again, I'm going to try not to, but it's hard to get around it with someone like Kelly. For almost every one of these players, that catch and shoot shot. Like if he can be elite, and I wrote about this the other day at allphly.com, but one of the keys to trying to survive the minutes without Joel Embiid is, can you put, and we had a podcast on this earlier in the week, can you put some of your bigger wings on there to remain competitive, or are you going to have to turn to Reggie Jackson or Kyle Lowry alongside of Tyrese Maxey to get more ball handling? Well, if your big wings can make a shot, it just makes that all so much easier. So for Martin, it is going to be, for me, a catch and shoot shot, even though it's boring to talk about.
So, see, this is why we're here together, because we're thinking the same along the lines. Mine is more the overall well-rounded. It's probably asking too much of him to show us a little bit more of what we saw in that 23 playoff series against the Boston Celtics.
Sure.
But whatever the confidence was that was there, to your point about the shooting, the catch and shoot shooting, because you're going to get some really good open looks, especially in the starting role. And it's funny because Money Mara says in the chat, Caleb Martin should be coming off the bench. He can't come from being demoted by the Heat to starting for the 76ers. The only difference is there's a lot different roster construction when you're looking at the starting five.
Sure.
With 3 All-Stars versus 2, what they have there, and how things are probably going to flow here. And that's why it makes more sense here with him starting than in Miami, Money Mart, in my opinion, because of who he's playing around with. Less of a problem there with the things that he's doing. Plus his defense is more of what they're really looking at in that starting role of defending all the wings that they have in the East. And that's just me, Money Mart. That's how I feel when I'm looking at it. But as we talk about that, if you can get the confidence of that guy, not saying that he lost it, because whatever it was, guys just get hot and it happens. But we know he can play. It's how much of that can be in there, especially in those big games, in those series that we talk about, where you're going to need a game from somebody else. Your best player, as I always say, your best player is going to win you 2. Your second best player is going to win you 1. And now that you have that third best player, maybe it's going to be where he wins you 1. But if not, you're going to need a collective effort, and you're probably going to need in 1 or if not 2 of those games for a role player to step up and be huge in a 7-game series. And we've already seen that he can do that. How sustainable is that? I don't know. I lean more towards it's not, because of what we're talking about here. And that is, can he give me a semblance of that on a daily basis, but more particularly in those big games, especially once we get to the postseason, where I don't want to be having the conversation later of, hey, Derek, Kyle, Bree, should we be starting this show off? And our show topic is, should Caleb Martin be taken out of the starting lineup? I need him to make sure that he implements himself and cements himself into being a starter on this basketball team going forward. As good as Eric Gordon's shooting may be, whoever else may be playing so well coming off the bench, I want him to establish himself as that 5th starter, where it's not even a question, should Yabusele be put in the starting lineup at some point during the season.
Yep.
That's what I'm looking at for Caleb Martin.
We all silly like the mayor.